tens of millions of customer credit card numbers stolen from Target Corporation.
How can you ensure you're keeping your credit and debit card details secure?
Have you ever heard of something called carding? No. No, it's got nothing to do with poker or anything like that. Carding is all about stealing and selling credit card information. Hackers love to get their hands on people's credit card data and then sell it to other criminals who use it to create fake cards or buy things online. Back in 2014, this marketplace called Joker's Stash pops up on the dark web. It quickly became the go-to spot for buying and selling stolen credit card info. Their stolen data was always fresh and valid. It hadn't been used yet, and the cards for sale were always active. Before I go further, I want you to know the two main types of stolen credit card: dumps and cards. Let me explain. Dumps are the raw data stored on the magnetic strip of your credit card. It's called Track 1 and Track 2 data. This is the stuff that gets read when you swipe your card at a store. Often it's used to create physical counterfeit cards. Cards, on the other hand, are all the information you'd use to make an online purchase. We're talking about the card number, expiration date, that little security code on the back, the CVV. Sometimes the seller even has the cardholder's name and address. With this info, criminals can make unauthorized purchases without needing the physical card in their possession. Joker's Stash sells both types of this data, and they're moving a massive amount of it. The owner behind it, who goes by Vega, moved around 40 million payment cards worth of data every single year. Yeah, that's a lot, and he was really good at it. The carding website kept growing on, and as you'll soon see, Vega did what most cyber criminals couldn't. By the end of the video, I'll show you the real people behind this notorious platform. But for now, let's explore their website and operations. Firstly, I'm not sure if anyone remembers, but there was a massive Target breach that happened back in 2013. It was like, suddenly, one of the biggest retail hacks ever. Cybersecurity wasn't as big back then, so it's hard to wrap your head around the scale of this breach. But 40 million credit and debit cards got stolen, and 70 million people had their personal details stolen. The hackers hit Target's point-of-sale systems, or POS for short. These are the computers and software that handle transactions when you swipe your card at the checkout. They're supposed to be super secure, but they have this vulnerability. The data from your card is briefly unencrypted in the system's memory when you make a purchase. Hackers found a way to grab that data during that split second. Consumers were freaking out, checking their statements, cancelling cards. Everyone couldn't believe it. But it got worse. Guess where all of the stolen credit card and personal information ended up? That's right, Joker's Stash. There's this hacker who goes by the name Rescator, and word on the street is he was the one who sold all that stolen Target data on Joker's Stash. It was Christmas for all the cyber criminals that day who knew where to find their hidden website. Millions of fresh credit card numbers flooded onto the black market. For the next 3 years, Vega operated Joker's Stash pretty well, consistently providing fresh dumps and cards. Fast forward to 2017, Vega decided to step up his game. Vega starts using something called blockchain DNS and Tor hidden services to better protect themselves and their users. After all, the money was flowing in with no one to stop them. Blockchain DNS is like a decentralized phone book for the internet. Instead of relying on regular DNS servers that can be blocked or taken down, Joker's Stash used blockchain technology to make their website addresses harder to censor. Vega even made a browser extension so customers could easily access their site. Then there's Tor. It's this network that bounces your internet connection through a bunch of different computers around the world, making it super hard to trace. Joker's Stash set up a hidden service on Tor, making their website hidden from the public internet. Why did Vega do all this? Simple. to make it easier for customers to access their illegal marketplace without getting caught. Imagine it like Vega rolled out the red carpet to all the cyber criminals out there with security guards on either side. Around this time, new cards and dumps started coming in from other big companies. Sonic and Jason's Deli show up on Joker's stash. These guys were expanding, adding extra protections to their illicit operations and getting increasingly sophisticated. Vega was making a ton of money, and it was clear he wasn't planning on slowing down anytime soon. Around 2 years later, on August 22nd, 2019, Joker's stash hit another big score. Don't get me wrong, over the years they dumped hundreds of millions of cards, but a notorious one was when they dumped 5.3 million credit card numbers, all stolen from a single company. We're talking about Hy-Vee, this gas station and convenience store chain. This was yet another point of sale breach. Basically, hackers found a way to hack into the computers that process card payments at Hy-Vee stores. These systems are supposed to be super secure, but in this case, they weren't. It didn't take long for cyber criminals to snatch them up. The dump was being sold under the name Solar Energy, and they had card account records on offer for between $17 and $35 each. 5.3 million people had their credit card info out there for sale. Let's say they all sell for the minimum price of $17, which is an undershot for sure. That's $90 million. That's honestly a nightmare scenario. It's a lot of money for the sellers and for the owners of Joker's stash. It's like they're the Amazon of stolen credit cards, if you can believe that. Quick intermission from all the cards and money Vega made. Here's some technical details about their website. Remember, Vega and his team running the site aren't amateurs. These guys are extremely smart. Joker's stash has got 2 servers that are doing some pretty clever stuff to keep law enforcement on their toes. First off, they're using something called certificate pivoting. It's a way of using digital certificates to hide their tracks. Basically, they were using this method to hide their infrastructure and possibly expand their operations. By pivoting through various certificates, they could make it harder for law enforcement to track and shut down all of their network. There were 4 more IP addresses on the same network that were all using identical security certificates. It's like they're all wearing the same disguise. The website also had this thing called a CAPTCHA. You know, those annoying tests where you have to prove you're not a robot. But theirs was custom made, calling it Joker's favorite CAPTCHA. It's like Vega was taunting the authorities. It's wild, right? These cyber criminals are using the same kind of security measures that legitimate businesses use, but they're twisting them to protect their illegal operations. Vega seemed to always be one step ahead. So, check this out. Even cyber criminals aren't immune to global pandemics. In October 2020, something wild happened. Vega announced on their forum he caught the C virus. He's updating the users of his website, letting them know his health and how he's feeling. He mentions that he spent a week in the hospital. When you're running an illegal online empire, you can't just call in sick or have someone cover your shift. This illness caused some serious disruptions to Joker's stash's operations. The site's forums started having issues. These forums are crucial for communication between sellers and buyers in the cybercrime world. Then there were problems with inventory replenishment. During this time, there were limited fresh batches of stolen credit card data. Without new data coming in, the whole operation starts to stall. Think of it like the shelves in the grocery store were running out of stock, except these products are people's most prized possessions. Despite these setbacks, the cybercrime ecosystem showed its resilience. Even with the big boss out of commission and operations disrupted, the criminal enterprise managed to keep going. It just goes to show how robust and adaptable these illegal networks have become. Now, just when you think things couldn't get easier for Joker's stash, law enforcement steps in. On December 17th, 2020, something major went down. The FBI and Interpol, two of the biggest international law enforcement agencies made their move. They seized what are called proxy servers. Proxy servers are like middlemen for internet traffic. In normal use, they can help with things like privacy or accessing content from other countries. But in cybercrime, they used to hide the real location and identity of the criminals running these operations. But the FBI and Interpol managed to get their hands on the external proxy server associated with these blockchain-based domains. Think of it kinda like they took control of the secret entrance to the criminals' hidden base. When this happened, the Joker's stash operators freaked out. Vega completely took down their site, only temporarily though. Then he started posting messages on underground forums trying to do damage control. He claimed it was just that one proxy server that got seized, and that Joker's stash would be back up and running in a couple of days. This whole incident shows how the pressure was really ramping up on Joker's stash. Law enforcement was getting closer, and their defenses looked like they were starting to crack. However, Joker's stash operators knew what they were doing, and managed to stay ahead of the law for quite some time. Instead of succumbing to the ramping heat of law enforcement, they pulled off the greatest escape in history. Two years later, on January 15th, after operating the site for a little longer and milking some more cash, Vega dropped a bomb on the community. Vega announces that Joker's stash is shutting down for good. Can you believe it? After years of running this massive illegal credit card marketplace, the owner decided he had enough. They're calling it quits. The announcement doesn't come through some fancy press release or anything like that. Nah, these guys do it old school. Well, cybercriminal old school. Joker's stash posts a message on a Russian-language cybercrime forum. It's like their version of Facebook, but for people who are into some seriously shady stuff. In this post, Vega says he's closing shop forever. He even throws in this little gem about how the team is heading into a well-deserved retirement. I mean, the audacity of these guys, right? He's talking about retiring from stealing people's credit card info like it's a normal 9-to-5 job. So what happens next? Well, Joker's stash doesn't just shut down overnight. They give themselves a month until February 15th, 2021. It's like they had a going out of business sale, but for stolen credit card data. During this time, I imagine there's a lot of scrambling in the cybercrime world. Buyers trying to get their last purchases in, sellers trying to offload their data before the platform disappears. This is where we get into some of the real challenges of fighting cybercrime. Even though Joker's stash is shutting down, and even though law enforcement agencies around the world have been trying to catch these guys, it's not that simple to bring them to justice. See, a lot of these cybercriminals operate from countries that don't have extradition treaties with the United States. What does that mean? Basically, even if the US knows who these criminals are and where they are, they can't just go and arrest them. They're playing a global game of catch me if you can, but with way higher stakes. This is a huge problem in the world of cybercrime. These criminals can sit in countries where they're basically untouchable, running their operations, stealing data from people all over the world. And even when they decide to retire, like the Joker's stash crew, there's often not much that can be done to hold them accountable. The internet has changed the game when it comes to crime. These aren't bank robbers who have to physically be at the scene of the crime. They're highly skilled but criminal IT professionals who can cause massive damage from halfway across the world, staying just out of reach of the law. So, as Joker's stash winds down operations in February 2021, it's not just the end of one illegal marketplace. It's a symbol of the ongoing game between cybercriminals and law enforcement, and the complex challenges of fighting crime in the digital age. Just remember, when one of these websites goes down, there's 4 more waiting to take their place, and their customers. Alright, so Joker's stash is gone, but the story doesn't end there. Actually, it gets pretty wild. First off, we found out that Joker's stash wasn't just about stolen credit cards. These guys had expanded their gold mine of personal information. Their website had even sold social security numbers, addresses, all that stuff. And better yet, they had info on some seriously high-profile people. We're talking Fortune 500 executives, even members of the White House cabinet. That's crazy, right? They had data from at least 35 different states. It's like they had their fingers in everyone's personal pie. The Insect Group, these are like the cyber detectives of the internet. They dug deep into Joker's Stash's setup. What they found was mind-blowing. They looked into the scale of their operation, as if it wasn't clear by now. They found about 49 servers and 543 domains, all linked to Joker's stash. That's not some small fry operation run by some skid out of their mum's basement. That's serious. And soon, I'll show you just how much money Joker's stash actually made. Anyway, remember before how I said there were many websites waiting to take their place? Well, when Joker's stash went down, it didn't just disappear into thin air. It left a huge hole in what they call the carding ecosystem. Imagine if Amazon suddenly shut down. That's kind of what happened here, but for cyber criminals. Law enforcement didn't just sit back and relax after Joker's stash closed shop. Nah, they kept digging. They knew that just because one big player was gone, it didn't mean the game was over. They were looking at how other criminals might try to fill the gap, watching for new platforms popping up, that kind of thing. And there were many, but we'll save that for another video. Law enforcement also kept digging into Vega and his operation. Years after their successful exit, Vega was enjoying the lavish life with his ill-gotten gains. He never thought years later that law enforcement might finally catch up to him, but that's exactly what they did. Fast forward to 2024. The German police pull off this massive operation called Final Exchange. It's like something out of a movie. They go after these cryptocurrency exchange services. Cryptocurrency exchanges are places where you can buy, sell, or trade digital money like Bitcoin. Most of these are legit businesses, but some, they're not so clean. The German cops identified 47 of these exchange services that were helping criminals launder money. We're talking about the bad guys from ransomware attacks, other cybercrime groups, all using these exchanges to clean their dirty digital cash. Here's how it works. These criminals steal money or data, then they need to turn it into cash they can actually use without getting caught. So they use these shady exchanges to convert their cryptocurrency into real money. It's like digital money laundering. These websites turn a blind eye to people using stolen money linked to cards from Joker's stash. The German police shut down some big names in this world at the time. Some of these were huge players. Together, these platforms had over 1.2 million user accounts and had processed more than 3.5 million transactions. That's a lot of dirty money being cleaned. This operation was a big deal because it hit the cyber criminals where it really hurts, their wallet. Without these exchange services, it becomes a lot harder for them to turn their stolen goods into usable cash. It's like cutting off the escape route for bank robbers. They might have the loot, but now they're stuck with it. Years later, law enforcement were hot on Vega's trail. This leads us to September 2024 now, and the US government finally has all the information they need to drop the hammer on Joker's stash. This really was like watching the finale of a crazy crime show, but this is all real life, man. They announced the names of 2 individuals that they've been tracking for quite some time. First up is Sergey Ivanov. This dude's got a cool hacker name, Talion. Sounds like something out of the Matrix, right? But here's the thing. This guy isn't just some small-time crook. The feds are saying he laundered over $1.5 billion in cryptocurrency. That's billion with a B. It's an insane amount of money. Now, how did he do this? He used these services called UAPS, PIN pays, and PM2 BTC. These are like the shady back alleys of the internet where criminals can turn their dirty digital money into clean cash. It's pretty wild stuff. But wait, there's more. The second guy, our protagonist, Vega, his name is Timur Shakhmametov. As you know by now, the dude's got a couple of aliases, Joker Stash and Vega. The US government say he's the guy who actually ran Joker's Stash. The feds reckon this operation made anywhere from $280 million to $1 billion in profits. Even at the lower end, we're talking serious cash, a figure that's so eye-watering that it is hard to even imagine. The US Treasury Department, through something called the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, also put sanctions on 2 cryptocurrency exchanges, Cryptex and PM to BTC. What does this mean? Basically, they're saying these exchanges were helping Russian ransomware gangs and other cybercrime groups clean their dirty money. When these cyber criminals steal all this money, they can't just deposit millions in stolen cash into a bank account. So they use cryptocurrency. It's digital, it's hard to trace, and it moves fast. They buy crypto with the stolen money, then they use these shady exchanges to turn that crypto back into real cash. But now it looks like it came from legit trades. It's money laundering at its finest. The reason these sanctions are put in place is because these illegally run cryptocurrency exchanges don't ask their users for verification, otherwise known as KYC or Know Your Customer. It's a thing used everywhere to prevent exactly this from happening. However, these guys know this, and they don't care. They want to make as much money as possible, so they let all sorts of criminals use their websites freely. Anyway, back to our guy, Vega, and his friend. The US government hasn't caught them yet, but they want to so badly. They're that keen to catch them, they're offering rewards. We're talking serious money here, up to $11 million for information that leads to the arrest or conviction of Timur Shakhmametov, Sergei Ivanov, and their buddies. This reward is facilitated through the Transnational Organized Crime Rewards Program. It's like America's Most Wanted, but for international cyber criminals. Do you think they will catch them? Or do you think they will continue to live a luxurious life while residing in a country with no extradition treaties? They likely follow a mantra that other Russian cyber criminals follow. Don't where you live, travel local, and don't go abroad. The story of Joker's Stash is like a wild roller coaster ride through the dark side of the internet. Even with Joker's Stash gone, and the masterminds behind it now on the FBI's most wanted cyber criminal list, the fight against cybercrime is far from over. These criminals are still at large, and there are hundreds more like them with identities that are yet to be known. They're always adapting, always finding new ways to steal data and make money. So, what does this all mean for people like you and I? Well, it's a reminder that our personal information is always at risk. These cyber criminals are out there, and they'll happily sell your info if they can get a hold of it. It's a global issue that affects all of us. Every time one of those websites you signed up for or put your card into gets hacked and their database gets dumped on the internet, just know that this is the reality. They end up on websites like Joker's Stash, and some other criminal is ready to buy it, siphon your bank accounts, blackmail you, and potentially ruin your entire life. Let me know in the comments if you'll think differently before giving away your information on the internet. Don't go anywhere. We've got a story coming up that quite frankly is disgusting.
A national software provider was hit by a ransomware attack.
In cybersecurity, attacks or attackers have some pretty interesting names. You've got 2 completely different cyber threats, separated by years, that both go by a silly and cute name, MEOW. Back in 2020, we had these automated attacks hitting databases, left and right. They were wiping out data faster than you could say delete. Fast forward to 2024, and we've got a whole different beast, a ransomware group using the same MEOW name, but those hackers are playing an elite game, where winning means to steal as much money as possible. As I take you through this story, I'm going to show you how something with a cute little name called MEOW caused widespread and devastating destruction across the interwebs. Trust me, the details are going to blow your mind, and there's nothing cute about it. So sit back and relax, because you're about to witness the most intriguing and alarming cyber incidents of the past few years. It's a tale of two MEOWS that'll make you think twice the next time you look at your cat or your computer. Imagine you're a database admin in 2020. You're just minding your own business, running your databases as usual, when suddenly you notice your database entries start getting overwritten with the simple word MEOW. That's exactly what happened. But this was serious. Industrial strength systems like Elasticsearch, MongoDB, Cassandra, CouchDB, Redis, Hadoop, and Jenkins started getting wiped worldwide. These are the backbone of many companies' data operations, storing everything from customer info to critical business data. Interestingly enough though, unlike normal cyber attacks, this wasn't targeted. All public-facing databases around the world were getting popped. It was hitting hundreds of unsecured databases that were left exposed on the internet. By July 25th, almost 4,000 databases were completely wiped out. That's a lot of damage in a short time, my friends. These MEOW attacks were using an automated script, basically a program that runs on its own without human intervention. This script wasn't just accessing the data, it was overriding or completely destroying it. And what was it overriding the data with, you might ask? Well, it was rewriting all the database entries to the value of MEOW. Yes, that's where the MEOW attack name comes from. Imagine someone breaking into your house and not just stealing your stuff, but replacing everything they stole with a cat. That's basically what they did. The attacks were coming from IP addresses associated with Proton VPN. No, this isn't a segue into a VPN sponsor, but you're likely all familiar with what they are now. They're used for privacy and security, but in this case, the attackers were using Proton VPN to hide the source of their attack. This attack, although very nasty, was super interesting because of their indiscriminate nature. Whoever was behind this attack, they weren't after specific data or trying to extort money. They were just destroying everything they could find. It's like they just wanted to graffiti all over the city. It was senseless vandalism. Although this graffiti also had the ability to cause massive consequences for businesses and individuals whose data was overwritten. The affected systems weren't just traditional databases either. Some systems were network-attached storage devices too. These are like external hard drives for entire networks, often containing storage or shared files for personal use at home, or backups for companies. So when these got hit, it could mean losing not just current data, but backups too. This MEOW attack was a wake-up call for many people who left their devices exposed and unsecured. It highlighted just how easy it can be, and how quickly an automated attack can spread across the entire internet. There's around 3.7 billion public IP addresses out there, which sounds like a lot, but depending on who's behind it, they might just have the power to scan a lot of these simultaneously. Remember how I said a VPN is supposed to keep you safe online, right? Well, listen carefully. I'm going to show you exactly what happened with one of the companies that got hit by the MEOW attack. Turns out, the MEOW attack hit a VPN provider that was doing the exact opposite of securing your privacy and security. In July 2020, this Hong Kong-based VPN provider called UFO VPN messed up big time. They left a massive database just sitting out there on the web, completely unprotected. I'm talking about an Elasticsearch cluster. That's a type of database system that's great for handling large amounts of data and searching through it quickly. Thing is, this cluster had no password, no authentication, nothing. It was like leaving your front door wide open, with a sign saying, "Come on in." I'm not talking about a few megabytes of data here. This was 894 gigabytes of user information. That's like, well, it's a lot. To put it in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to 447,000 hours of MP3 music, or about 223 full-length HD movies. But instead of music or movies, this was all sensitive user data. So what kind of data am I talking about? Well, it was a real treasure trove for hackers or cyber criminals. Hell, even law enforcement. They were storing plain text passwords. That means passwords that weren't encrypted or protected in any way. You might as well write your ATM PIN on a sticky note and stick it on the ATM. Then there were VPN session secrets, which are basically the keys that keep your VPN connection secure. Without those, anyone could potentially decrypt and read your supposedly private internet traffic. The database also included tokens, which are like digital keys that can give access to user accounts without needing a password. And of course, there were IP addresses. It was the IP addresses of all the users who were using the service. This is bad. Anyone could have peeked at it and used it to track your location or your online activities. You might be wondering, why was a VPN company storing all this info? Well, that's where we get into VPN logging practices. See, many VPN companies claim they don't keep logs of user activity. It's a big selling point. Use our VPN and nobody will know what you're doing online. The validity of this statement is always uncertain, and some VPN providers might even give away information about their users in the case they get subpoenas from law enforcement about illegal traffic on their service. But that's a story for another video. But in the case of UFO VPN, well, they said they weren't storing any user logs, but actually they were keeping detailed logs of everything. On July 20th, 2020, this exposed database got hit by what we now know as a MEOWS bot attack. This automated attack swooped in and just deleted almost all the records in the database. Poof, gone. The only things left were some newly added records that the bot hadn't gotten to yet. This MEOWS attack wiped out a lot of the exposed user data, potentially protecting some users' privacy. Funny that. The implications of this breach were huge. Anyone who had been using UFO VPN thinking they were browsing privately? Nope. Their online activities, their real IP addresses, even their passwords were all out there for anyone to see. It's like thinking you're in a private dressing room, only to realize the walls are made of glass and you're in the middle of Times Square. This incident really highlighted the importance of choosing a trustworthy VPN provider and the risks of improper data storage. Sometimes the tools we use to protect ourselves can become the very things that expose us if they're not handled properly. So on the topic of widespread scanning and attacks, this company called Comparitech decided to set up what's called a honeypot, basically a juicy target for hackers to attack. They were watching the whole time, seeing what would happen. They just left it out there on the internet, completely exposed. No password, no security, nothing. It's like leaving a wallet on a busy street and seeing who picks it up. They let this thing sit out there from May 11th to May 22nd, 2020. That's less than 2 weeks. But man, did some bad stuff happen. Now, get this. In that short time, they recorded 175 unauthorized requests. In the world of cybersecurity, we call these attacks. That's an average of 18 attacks per day. Think about that. Every single day, 18 times, someone or something was trying to mess with this database. The first attack came just 8 hours and 35 minutes after they set up the honeypot. That's really fast. It really shows you how quickly hackers can find you on the internet. They let the honeypot sit to rot for a while, and on May 29th, a malicious bot found it. This bot wasn't messing around. It straight up deleted everything in the database and left a message asking for payment. Classic ransomware move. It was just like the MEOWS attack. The bot used some specific commands to do its dirty work. It used commands like this to look at the list of indexes on the database. Then, it reviewed the contents of the default index with the following command. It's like the bot was casing the joint before robbing it. Locations were determined using attackers' IP addresses. Notably, the top 3 highest numbers of attacks, filtered by countries, were 89 from the USA, 38 from Romania, and 15 came from China. Just remember though, the attackers were likely using a VPN to hide their tracks. The attack used 3 main methods: get, delete, and post. These are like the verbs of the internet. Get is used to retrieve information. The bot was using this to see what was in the database. Delete is exactly what it sounds like. It was used to wipe out the data. And post? That's how the bot left its ransom message, by posting a text file onto the server. This whole experiment really shows how vulnerable we are. And the scary part is, this was just a honeypot. Imagine if this was a real database with important information. In less than 2 weeks, it could be completely wiped out, with the owners being held for ransom. That's honestly so crazy to me. Here comes the next MEOWS that took the internet by storm. I'm talking about the rise of the MEOWS ransomware group in 2023 and 2024. MEOWS ransomware, a sophisticated threat actor, burst onto the scene and immediately claims the number 2 spot on the ransomware hit list. That's like an amateur fighter coming into the UFC, getting put on the main card and winning the title. It's impressive. There was a catch to do this, however. MEOWS isn't entirely an amateur. It's actually a variant of another infamous ransomware called Conti. Imagine if Conti was Darth Vader. MEOWS would be like a more evolved, possibly more dangerous Kylo Ren. Before we go further, remember, the MEOWS attacks before was a name given to a set of attacks that overwrote databases with the text MEOWS. This MEOWS ransomware gang is a group of cyber criminals who called themselves MEOWS. They use something called the CHA-20 encryption algorithm. This isn't your basic encryption. It's a seriously robust method that's hard to crack. CHA-20 is like a super complicated lock that scrambles all your files, making them unreadable. But here's an interesting twist. MEOWS doesn't encrypt everything. It leaves .exe and text files alone. Think of it like a burglar who breaks into your house and steals everything in your cupboard, but leaves the cupboard behind. What really sets MEOWS apart is its focus. Most ransomware groups are all about encrypting your data and holding it for ransom. MEOWS, they're more interested in stealing your data outright. It's like they've realized it's easier to steal the jewels than to lock them in a safe and demand the combination. This recent shift in tactics in the cybersecurity landscape is huge. MEOWS has turned their operation into a full-blown data leak marketplace. Let's look at a real-world example. In August, MEOWS allegedly hacked Bank Systems, an IT support firm in Auckland, New Zealand. They didn't encrypt Banks' data, they stole it. 15 gigabytes of confidential information. That's a small library's worth of private documents. But from an IT support firm, this could be crucial documents of any of their clients. They posted on their dark web leak site saying, "We are excited to present you with an exclusive data pack containing over 15 gigabytes of confidential information from Bank Systems." A link to purchase the stolen data and their company logo sat at the top of the page, with a list of hundreds more companies below them. So, Checkpoint, this big cybersecurity firm, drops their August report, and guess who's stealing the spotlight? That's right, it was the MEOWS ransomware gang. These guys came out of nowhere, and suddenly they're responsible for 9% of all global ransomware attacks. 1 in every 10 ransomware attacks worldwide is tied to the cute name MEOW. It's obvious by now that MEOW isn't just some small-time operation. The only crew ahead of them is RansomHub, sitting pretty at 15% of attacks. Then you've got MEOW at 9%, and Lockbit3 trailing behind at 8%. The main operators of the group develop the ransomware virus and provide it and the infrastructure to affiliates or other hackers. And then they have the guys with feet on the ground, or I guess I should say on the internet, who carry out the attacks on thousands of victims worldwide. This business model is a game changer, since it lowers the barrier to entry for wannabe cybercriminals. They don't need to be coding geniuses or have a ton of resources. They just need to sign up with a group like MEOW or RansomHub, and they're given all the tools they need to start attacking after they successfully steal all their information from a company and receive a payment from their begging victim not to release it. The operators and the affiliates split the cash, so they both come out on top. Since they focus on stealing the data, even if a company has good backups and could recover from traditional ransomware, they're still at risk, because now it's not just about getting your data back, it's about preventing your sensitive information from being sold on the dark web. The impact of this can't be overstated. Companies face the threat of potential long-term damage to their reputation, legal issues from data privacy violations, and the possibility of competitors getting their hands on trade secrets. The MEOW ransomware gang recently performed an attack on Donko & Sons that was pretty impressive. The family-owned sign and lighting company that's been around for over 40 years. They're just going about their business, making signs, installing lights, when they got popped by MEOW. The MEOW group stole a massive 230 gigabytes of data. Customer data, financial records, pretty much everything. But they were observed using 2 heavy-duty encryption algorithms. CHA-20, like seen previously, combined with RSA 4096. CHA-20 takes the files and scrambles them so quickly and thoroughly that it's practically impossible to unscramble without the key. RSA 4096, on the other hand, uses a public key to encrypt the data and a private key to decrypt it. The 4096 refers to the key size, and let me tell you, that's huge. Cracking this would take an absurd amount of computing power and time. By combining these 2 algorithms, MEOW creates a 2-layer encryption that's incredibly tough to crack. It's like putting a lock on a lock. They've posted about the attack on their dark web leak site, basically advertising 230 gigabytes of Donko's confidential data to the highest bidder. The ransom demand? $24,000. That might not sound like a lot for a big corporation, but for a family-owned business, that's a serious hit. These guys are upgrading their tactics while simultaneously performing ruthless attacks. For Donko & Sons, this isn't just about the money, it's about their reputation, their customers' trust, and potentially even the survival of their 40-year-old family business. It's a reminder for smaller companies, you need to be diligent. Not having the resources to defend against such advanced threats is simply not an option. We've got these 2 MEOW incidents that happened years apart, but man, they couldn't be more different if they tried. Both of these threats use the name MEOW, but that's where the similarities end. The 2020 attacks were all about causing chaos, while the 2024 group is running a full-blown criminal enterprise. Go and give your cute little furry friend a computer and a taste for ill-gotten gains, and maybe he'll be in the next video. The cybersecurity landscape is changing faster than most people can keep up with. From some bored guy performing random acts of data destruction to targeted ransomware attacks, regardless of what people want to call it, is something to think about in any case. Database security is still a major challenge. The 2020 MEOWS attacks showed how vulnerable unsecured databases can be. But the 2024 MEOWS ransomware group proves that even well-protected systems can be at risk if the attackers are sophisticated enough. Always, always, always secure your databases. Use strong passwords, encrypt sensitive data, and don't leave them exposed on the public web. Be prepared for ransomware attacks. Keep your systems updated, and don't stop learning about cybersecurity and expanding your existing knowledge. Many attacks start with phishing emails or social engineering. You must, and I repeat, you must know what to look out for. Remember, the cyber criminals are always evolving their tactics. Tomorrow I might be barking about something completely different. No pun intended. So stay on our toes and let me know in the comments if there's anything you need help with. I'll try my best to give you some advice. Kaspersky, a big cybersecurity company, stumbled upon something crazy. They discovered this new hacker group they ended up calling Cloud Sorcerer. Pretty cool name, right? Sounds like something straight out of World of Warcraft. This was yet another advanced, persistent threat that you probably haven't heard about. APTs are the special forces of the hacking world. APTs are usually operated by governments or elite units in the military, and they're not after quick hits. They're in it for the long haul, trying to stay hidden and gather intel over time. And Cloud Sorcerer? They're observed going after a target that is unusual for sure. Russian government entities. Cloud Sorcerer doesn't use ordinary hacking tools. They've got this sophisticated cyber espionage tool that's leveraging cloud infrastructure in ways we've never seen before. They used Microsoft Graph, Yandex Cloud, Dropbox, and even GitHub as their initial command and control server. Their command and control servers, or C2, is the system that hackers use to send commands to infected computers and receive stolen data. Normally, hackers might set up their own servers for this, but Cloud Sorcerer? They're using legit cloud services. This is a tactic that's been growing in the cybersecurity scene recently, which is extremely difficult to do. So usually it's only these APT groups that are observed doing it. They're accessing these cloud resources through APIs, the thing that different software systems use to talk to each other. Cloud Sorcerer is using authentication tokens to access these APIs. This setup allows for some seriously stealthy monitoring and data collection. They can blend in with normal traffic, making it super hard to detect. It's a whole new level of cyber espionage, using tools that are typically used for legitimate business purposes to carry out their attacks. The scary part? This isn't just some ransomware gang trying to make some money. No. This malware is used to monitor systems in real time, collect sensitive information, and exfiltrate it, secretly send it back to themselves, all while flying under the radar of security measures. Cloud Sorcerer isn't just another threat. It's pushing the boundaries of what's possible in cyber attacks, and the guys behind it have got their sights set on some seriously high-profile targets. Do you want to know exactly what Cloud Sorcerer was capable of? If not, then click off this video now. This is some seriously advanced stuff, bro. Before we continue, just remember that at this point in the story, we don't know who exactly is behind it. Anyway, it has a whole suite of spying features. It can capture screenshots, which means it's literally taking pictures of whatever's on your computer screen. But it doesn't stop there. This thing can also record your microphone. Yeah, you heard that right. It's like having a hidden mic in your room, picking up every conversation. And if that wasn't enough, it's also logging your keystrokes. Every letter you type, every password you enter, it's all being recorded. Cloud Sorcerer can also grab passwords and even harvest Gmail inboxes. That means it's not just seeing what you're doing now, but potentially accessing all your past communications too. But what makes Cloud Sorcerer really stand out is its modular framework. In tech speak, this means it's built in separate, interchangeable parts. It's got different modules for communication and data collection, which all runs from a single executable file. It's packaged up real nicely. The way the malware's modules talk to each other is pretty clever too. It uses something called Windows pipes. Now normally Windows pipes are a legit way for different processes on a computer to communicate. But in this case, the malware is using them to pass stolen data between its modules without raising suspicion. Here's another cool, scary feature. Cloud Sorcerer can adapt its behavior based on which process it's running in. It's like a chameleon, changing its color to blend in with its surroundings. This makes it harder to detect and allows it to perform different functions depending on where it's hiding in your system. It's not just about what it can do, but how it does it. The modular design, the use of legitimate Windows features, the adaptive behavior, it's all designed to make Cloud Sorcerer as stealthy and effective as possible. This is the kind of stuff that keeps cybersecurity experts up at night, man. It's a constant cat and mouse game between these advanced, persistent threats and the folks trying to protect against them. And with malware like Cloud Sorcerer out there, it's clear that the game is getting more intense than ever. Let's go deeper into the Cloud Sorcerer malware. I'm about to get really technical, so listen carefully. First off, we've got what's called a PE binary. PE stands for Portable Executable, and it's the standard file format for executables in Windows. This Cloud Sorcerer PE binary is written in C, which is a powerful programming language often used for system-level programming. Whoever wrote it must have an elite level of knowledge and experience. This malware uses a technique called shellcode injection. Shellcode is a small piece of code that can be used to exploit a software vulnerability. In this case, Cloud Sorcerer injects its shellcode into legitimate Windows processes. We're talking about msixec.exe, which is the Windows installer, mspaint.exe, which is just your regular old Microsoft Paint, and explorer.exe, which is the Windows File Explorer. Why is this a big deal? Well, by injecting into these legitimate processes, Cloud Sorcerer can hide in plain sight. Your antivirus might not flag it because these are processes that should be running on your system anyway. The backdoor functionality of Cloud Sorcerer is pretty extensive. It's got what the researchers call an extensive command set. These are basically instructions that the malware can receive and execute. Think of it like a really evil to-do list that can be updated remotely. Now, let's see how Cloud Sorcerer communicates with its controllers. The malware uses GitHub for its initial command and control, C2 communication. Yeah, you heard that right. GitHub, the platform used by developers all over the world to share and collaborate on code. Cloud Sorcerer connects to a specific GitHub page and parses it. Parsing means it's reading through the page, looking for specific information. This information could be new commands, updates to the malware, or instructions on where to send stolen data. It's a clever technique because GitHub is a legitimate site with lots of traffic, so this communication might not raise immediate red flags. And the account it talks to, it just looks like a normal account, except it has weird strings of characters on the homepage of the account. Likely a ciphered message used by the malware. Then it uses a combination of other cloud infrastructure in ways that make it hard to detect and track. Like I mentioned earlier, Microsoft Graph, Yandex Cloud, and Dropbox, all legitimate cloud services that this malware is exploiting. This is the kind of advanced persistent threat that gives people jobs in cybersecurity. Constant monitoring is essential for these attacks. If they have you in their target and you make one small mistake, consider your network compromised. It's not just about what it can do, but how it does it, the use of legitimate processes and services, the advanced injection techniques, the clever C2 communication. It's all designed to make Cloud Sorcerer as stealthy and effective as possible. I've got to talk to you about the initial infection. Bit of a heads up. No one actually really knows how they do it yet. Yeah, that's absurd, right? The cybersecurity experts don't actually know exactly how Cloud Sorcerer first gets into a system. That's how sneaky this thing is. But once it's in, it starts dropping some files. Specifically, it drops 2 files. You'll notice one of them is a DLL, or Dynamic Link Library. It's a type of file that contains code and data that multiple programs can use at the same time. The malware uses a technique called DLL sideloading. This is where a legitimate program is tricked into loading a malicious DLL instead of the legit one it's supposed to use. It's like swapping out a real part in your car with a fake one that looks the same but does something totally different. Once it's in, Cloud Sorcerer sets up what's called a backdoor. It can start communicating with its C2 servers, or it can inject what's called shellcode into other processes running on the computer. Cloud Sorcerer doesn't just connect to one set server. Instead, it uses what are called dead drop resolvers. These are like secret drop points where the malware can pick up new instructions or leave stolen data. In this case, Cloud Sorcerer is using 2 different services as dead drops, GitHub and my .mail.ru. When it connects to GitHub, it's not just browsing the site like you or I would. It's connecting to a specific page. This is what I was just mentioning earlier. Then it uses a function called Internet Read File to read the entire web page into the computer's memory. But it's not looking at the page content. It's looking for that hidden set of instructions encoded in the page. If it can't connect to GitHub, it has a backup plan. It tries to connect to my .mail.ru, which is a Russian cloud photo hosting service. Again, it's not looking at actual photos, but for a specific photo album that contains a hidden message. This hidden message is what's called a hex string. It's a way of encoding information using hexadecimal numbers. Cloud Sorcerer has its own custom way of decoding this hex string using what's called a hard-coded char code substitution table. Its secret decoder is custom, only Cloud Sorcerer knows how to use it. All of this, the DLL sideloading, the dead drop resolvers, the custom decoding, it's all designed to make it incredibly difficult to spot. So we've looked at how the malware works, how it communicates back to its masters, but we haven't looked at any specific campaigns yet. So let me show you the East Wind campaign. It's some intense attacks that went down in late July 2024. Yeah, that's only recently. It was a massive series of cyber attacks that hit Russian government organizations and IT companies hard. But there was a catch. They weren't using a similar version of the exact Cloud Sorcerer malware observed previously. They took that Cloud Sorcerer backdoor we talked about earlier and gave it an upgrade. It's like they took an already dangerous tool and made it even more powerful. But how did they actually get into these systems? It's a technique called spear phishing. Now, we've all heard of phishing, right? Where someone tries to trick you into clicking a dodgy link or giving up your password. Well, spear phishing is like that, but way more targeted. These attackers sent out emails to specific people in these Russian organizations. But these weren't just any emails. They came with attachments, RAR, archives to be specific. RAR is a type of compressed file, kind of like a zip file. Normally you might use these to send a bunch of photos or documents in one file. But in this case, these RAR files were hiding something nasty. Inside these archives was a malicious shortcut. Now, a shortcut on your computer usually just opens a program or a file, right? But this shortcut was designed to do a whole lot more. When someone clicked on it, it would set off a chain reaction. First, it would open up a bait document. This is probably something that looked legit, maybe a report or a memo that the person was expecting to see. But while they're distracted by that, the shortcut is busy in the background. It's moving files around and then executing the actual malware. This is a pretty clever technique because it plays on human nature. People see a document they're expecting, so they don't realize that something malicious is happening behind the scenes. The scale of this attack is what really was disturbing. We're not talking about just 1 or 2 targets here. Kaspersky found that dozens of systems were hit. This was a coordinated, large-scale assault on Russia's digital infrastructure. As we look deeper into the East Wind campaign, we found a few interesting things. First up, it uses this thing called GRUAPatcher. Now this isn't some new kid on the block. Kaspersky says another Chinese hacking group that goes by the name of APT31 has been using this bad boy since at least 2021. But here's where it gets interesting. GRUAPatcher doesn't just sit on your computer. It actually downloads itself from Dropbox. Yeah, that Dropbox, the one you might use to share photos or documents. But in this case, it's being used to deliver malware. GRUAPatcher is what we call a RAT, a remote access Trojan. It's like giving someone a secret key to your house. Once it's in, it can do all sorts of nasty stuff. But what makes it really sneaky is how it communicates. It's got 2 command servers it can talk to, and it even uses GitHub profiles as addresses for these servers. That's some next level stuff right there. Sounds awfully similar, right? And how could we forget that backdoor we talked about earlier? Well, if you want to know what I meant about giving it an upgrade, well, this new version is using something called VM Protect packing. That's a technique that makes the malware really hard to analyze. It's technically an anti-tamper modification to the malware, which runs it inside its own virtual machine that is able to obfuscate what the program is doing. Basically, it's like if you put your favorite game in a safe, but you could play it while it's locked away. But that's not all. This new cloud sorcerer also uses machine-specific encryption. That means the encryption is tied to the specific computer it's on. If you try to move it to another machine to study it, it won't work. And get this, it's now using Quora and LiveJournal for its command and control. Yeah, those websites where people ask questions and blog. They're turning normal websites into secret communication channels for malware. Could you even believe that's possible? Last but not least, it has this new player called PlugY. Kaspersky says this is a brand new backdoor they've never seen before. But the funny thing is, its code looks a lot like another backdoor called DRB Control, which is linked to another Chinese hacking group, APT27. PlugY is what we call an implant. It gets loaded onto the system through the Cloud Sorcerer backdoor. Once it's in, it's got a ton of commands it can run. And it's flexible too. It can communicate in 3 different ways: TCP, UDP, and something called named pipes. Basically, it has 3 different secret languages it can speak to its controllers. All of this adds up to a pretty scary picture. This campaign had links back to 2 previous Chinese hacking groups, since it used very similar tools and techniques, and it wasn't a single piece of malware either. This East Wind campaign is using at least 3 different tools, each with its own special capabilities, and they're all working together, creating this multi-layered attack that's really hard to defend against. There is a very, very high chance that we're dealing with 2 major players in the cyber espionage world, APT31 and APT27. Looks like we can finally put a name to a face. These are Chinese hacking groups that are known for their advanced tactics. The campaign East Wind makes sense now. It's pretty fitting when you think about it, like a wind from the east sweeping across the Russian internet. The East Wind campaign marks a critical turning point in cyber warfare. This massive, coordinated attack on Russian government and IT systems combines the expertise of APT-31 and APT-27, two notorious Chinese hacking groups. The attackers targeted dozens of systems with devastating precision. This unprecedented collaboration between hacking groups signals a new era of cyber threats. But as you'll soon see, the history of this group and the true identity behind it is still hard to unpack. I want you to look at the bigger picture with me here. This cloud sorcerer thing didn't just pop up out of nowhere. We're talking about a long history of cyber espionage that goes back to 2008. Straight up, we are watching the evolution of some crazy, unstoppable hackers right before our eyes. Let's start with Operation Groundbait back in 2016. This was one of the first big cyber attacks we saw in the Russia-Ukraine conflict area. It was pretty basic compared to what we're seeing now, but they had similar attack patterns. Then in 2017, we had Operation Bug Drop. The hackers behind this operation were getting more sophisticated, using malware to turn on computer microphones and record conversations. They shared similarities as well. There's this group called Bad Magic, but they may also go by the name Red Stinger. These guys are the group that's been around for a long time, back to at least 2008, and they're still active today. They were using a malware framework called Cloud Wizard. Only thing is, the malware framework of Cloud Wizard and Cloud Sorcerer are completely different, which has left cybersecurity experts wondering, is this a new threat entirely? Or is this a new malware framework created by the same mastermind? Basically, both Cloud Wizard and Cloud Sorcerer share identical source code and victimology patterns, indicating that the threat actors could have potentially been repeatedly tweaking its malware arsenal and infecting targets for about 15 years. From 2020 to 2023, we saw a lot of activity from Bad Magic. They were refining their techniques, getting more sophisticated, and all of this led up to the cloud-based operations we're seeing now with Cloud Sorcerer. What we're seeing here is a global evolution of cyber espionage tactics. These groups are learning from each other, adapting their techniques, and expanding their targets. It's not just about stealing data anymore. They're using cloud services. They're hiding their tracks better, and they're getting harder to detect. Another interesting thing, which could lead this attribution to China after all, is that they weren't just interested in Russia or Ukraine. In May 2024, we saw an attack on a US organization that used the same tactics as Cloud Sorcerer. The security firm Proofpoint caught this one, and they're calling it UNK Arbitrary Acrobat. This attack was pretty clever. They used a fake email account pretending to be from a well-known US think tank. They sent out fake event invitations that tricked people into downloading a zip file. This file was hosted on a site that mimicked an Adobe Acrobat installer. It looked legit, but was actually controlled by the hackers. So we've got all these major campaigns targeting Russian government entities, and even recently, US entities. But they're not just one-timers. We're looking at an ongoing threat that's been building for decades. These APT groups, they're not going away. They're learning, adapting, and getting better at what they do. They're using really advanced malware that can hide inside legitimate processes, communicating over legitimate cloud services. Who knows what exactly these hackers are trying to accomplish, or what data they're after. It might forever be a mystery. I think I'm going to make a future video about this, just so we can explore the exact details behind all of them. The attacker's methodology and the uncertainty between attribution makes it extremely hard to pinpoint the culprit, or if they are even the same hackers across these multiple campaigns. They might also be a large group, all working together. Who knows? But one thing's for certain, they are damn good at hacking. If you want to learn more about what these secretive and elusive groups have to offer, make sure to look forward to future videos on this channel. We may get the answers we are truly looking for. As for now, keep an eye out for these attack vectors in your network. You never know if they might be lurking.
Stealing and laundering over $230 million in cryptocurrency.
This arrest is suspected to be involved in a cryptocurrency scam.
A 24-year-old guy named Remy St. Felix is running an international robbery crew out of West Palm Beach, Florida. But these guys were after something way more valuable and harder to trace: cryptocurrency. St. Felix and his crew had a pretty brutal operation. They weren't like normal hackers, popping accounts from the comfort of their basements. These guys were straight up breaking into people's homes, terrorizing them, and forcing them to hand over their crypto. They didn't want to hang around ATMs and rob people after getting cash out. They were chasing larger gains, which you'll soon see was way more personal and way more terrifying. From September 2022 to July 2023, these guys were on an absolute tear. I'm talking about multiple home invasions targeting wealthy victims who they researched prior, knowing they had significant crypto holdings, and the scale of their operation was insane. Over those 10 months, they managed to steal hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cryptocurrency. To pull this off, St. Felix's crew had to be experts in a few different areas. First, there's the cryptocurrency theft itself. They needed to understand how different crypto wallets and exchanges work, and how to quickly transfer funds without getting caught. Then there's the social engineering aspect, figuring out who to target and how to get information about their victims. And of course, they had to be skilled at breaking through physical security measures, like alarms and locks. What makes this case so fascinating is how it blends old-school violent crime with cutting-edge technology. These weren't just computer nerds, and they weren't just thugs. They were a dangerous combination of both, exploiting vulnerabilities in both digital and physical security to pull off some of the biggest heists in crypto history. It's a quiet morning on Wells Street in Durham. We've got this elderly couple, both 76 years old, just going about their day in their home. They've probably lived there for years, you know, comfortable, familiar surroundings. But man, they had no idea what was about to hit them. At around 7:30 in the morning, we're talking early, right? Most people are just having their coffee. There's a knock at the door. Two guys show up, dressed like construction workers. They tell the couple they're there to check the pipes. Sounds legit, right? But here's where it goes sideways. These aren't real workers. As soon as the door opens, they were face to face with St. Felix and his accomplice. Now we're dealing with a home invasion. They are armed, and they're not messing around. They grab the couple and start tying them up with zip ties. So now we've got this elderly couple, probably terrified out of their minds, tied up in their own home with two armed men. It only gets worse from here. His accomplice, Elmer Ruben Castro, takes the wife and isolates her in the bathroom. Now this isn't just any old gun he's got. We're talking about a revolver with a pink cylinder. It's almost comical, right? Except there's nothing funny about what's happening. Castro, he's not messing around. He shows her it's loaded. He's making sure she knows the threat is real. Meanwhile, Remy St. Felix, he's got the husband cornered. But he's not just after cash or jewelry. No, he's after crypto. St. Felix forces the husband to access his Coinbase account on his Apple iMac. Coinbase is one of the biggest cryptocurrency exchanges out there. It's where people buy, sell, and store various types of digital currencies. But accessing the account isn't enough for these guys. St. Felix makes the husband install something called AnyDesk. AnyDesk is what we call remote desktop software. In normal, non-criminal use, it's a tool that lets IT support or remote workers access a computer from afar. It's super useful for legitimate purposes, like fixing someone's computer issues without having to be physically present. But this wasn't for legitimate use. There was actually another perpetrator, a third member of their crew, who was waiting for the AnyDesk connection details so he could connect to the computer right then and there and assist in the robbery. This combination of a physical threat and digital intrusion is what makes this crime so chilling. These guys aren't just using physical force. It's a whole new level of home invasion that blends the physical and digital worlds in a terrifying way. Man, this is where things get really dark. The situation in that Durham home went from bad to worse, as Remy St. Felix, the ringleader of this crypto robbery crew, started making some seriously messed up threats. St. Felix told the husband he was going to cut off his toes and his... You know what? Just think about that for a second. But he didn't stop there. St. Felix then threatened to shoot the husband and do unthinkable things to his wife, who was still restrained in the other room. The level of cruelty here is almost unimaginable. These victims must have been absolutely terrified, fearing for their lives, and worse. And it wasn't just threats. St. Felix actually struck the husband in the head. This is the brutal reality of these crypto robbery crews. They're not just hackers sitting behind computers. They're willing to commit horrific acts of violence to get what they want. As we'll see next, the ordeal for this poor couple was far from over. St. Felix and his crew weren't done terrorizing them yet. So these guys, they've just terrorized this poor elderly couple and stolen their crypto, right? But now they're in full panic mode, trying to cover their tracks. First thing they do, they absolutely wreck the couple's iMac and phones. Now, let me tell you why this is a big deal. In today's world, our devices are like digital fingerprints, right? That iMac could have had all sorts of incriminating stuff. Browser history, emails, maybe even security footage. And phones? Man, those things track our every move. Then, they duct tape the wife's mouth shut. Can you imagine how terrifying that must be? It's a desperate move to buy more time before anyone can call for help. A BMW X5 was parked right out front of the house from 7:28 a.m. to 9:07 a.m. It's the same one they took off in. And guess what? Surveillance footage shows this same SUV lurking around the neighborhood for 3 whole days before the robbery. That's some serious, methodical stuff. They're studying the area, learning the victim's routines, probably mapping out escape routes. This is the kind of situation that keeps me up at night, you know? The idea that someone could just show up at your door, pretending to be something they're not, and then boom, your whole world is turned upside down. It's a reminder that we've got to be careful, even in our own homes. But here's the thing, despite all their efforts to cover their tracks and get out unnoticed, they were about to learn that in this day and age, it's almost impossible to disappear completely. To be fair, they weren't the smartest cyber criminals. Just 90 minutes after the robbery, a new account pops up under the accomplice's name, Elmer Castro. And it's not empty, my friends. We're talking $22,267 worth of crypto suddenly appearing. Then, about 8 hours later, another account opens up, this time under Remy St. Felix's name. And wouldn't you know it, the exact same amount, $22,267, shows up there too. Every transaction on the blockchain leaves a trail. It's like digital breadcrumbs. Normally, crypto transactions can be pretty anonymous. But when you're moving stolen funds into accounts with your real name, that's just asking to get caught. Investigators were on their trail quickly. They found these guys' phones pinging off towers near the crime scene during the robbery. And get this, they traced their journey all the way from South Florida to Durham, North Carolina, around April 8th. That's some serious travel for a construction job, right? Now here's where it gets really interesting. On April 11th, just a day before the robbery, Castro's debit card is used at a Walmart in Durham. And what does he buy? A clipboard, a safety vest, sunglasses, and khaki pants. Sound familiar? It's the exact disguise they used for the robbery. This is where modern crime investigation gets fascinating. We're not just talking about fingerprints and eyewitnesses anymore. It's all about digital forensics. Investigators are piecing together this crime using cryptocurrency transactions, cell phone location data, and even credit card purchases. It's wild to think about how much information we leave behind in our daily lives. For most of us, it's not a big deal. But for criminals, man, good luck. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. As we're about to see, these guys left even more incriminating evidence in places they probably thought were safe. So, the investigators start digging into Castro's iCloud account and St. Felix's Google account. Now, these cloud storage services are where most people keep their photos, messages, and all sorts of personal stuff. But for these guys, they find messages between him and St. Felix talking about their trip to North Carolina. There's even a note with the husband's car license plate. They even find a photo of a pink revolver. Remember that pink cylinder gun from earlier? Yeah, it's the same one. They were documenting their own crime spree. Now St. Felix's Google account. This is where the real discovery was. They find photos of the husband's driver's license, clear evidence they were targeting this specific couple. There's a photo of Castro in a BMW X5, which matches the getaway car. They even find a picture of a handgun next to some BMW keys. They find a photo of St. Felix wearing clothes that match what the victims described. But wait, it gets better. The investigators find messages from February 2023, months before the Durham robbery. These guys are talking about plans to rob cryptocurrency investors. They're calling these robberies retirement licks. Can you believe that? They're treating this like some kind of clever career path. Normally, your cloud storage is just a convenient way to back up your data. But in criminal investigations, it becomes a goldmine of evidence. Every photo, every message, every note you save to the cloud leaves a fingerprint. And these fingerprints can be traced back to specific devices, locations, and timestamps. The scary part is, most people don't realize how much information they're storing in the cloud. For these criminals, their own digital habits became their downfall. They thought they were being smart by destroying physical evidence, but they forgot about the trail on the internet. As we're about to see, all this evidence is about to come crashing down on St. Felix in a big way. The hammer just came down on Remy St. Felix, and it came down hard. This dude, barely old enough to rent a car, just got nailed by a jury on 9. Count 'em, 9. Separate charges. We're talking conspiracy, kidnapping, something called Hobbs Act robbery, wire fraud, and brandishing a firearm while committing violent crimes. It's like a greatest hits album of felonies. St. Felix is looking at a minimum of 7 years in the slammer. But get this, the maximum sentence? Life in prison. This guy could potentially never see the outside of a cell again. He was scheduled for sentencing on September 11th, and I guarantee you, the judge isn't going to be in a forgiving mood. This conviction is huge, man. It's not just about putting one bad dude away. This dismantles a major international crypto robbery gang. By taking down St. Felix, law enforcement has cut the head off the snake. It sends a message to other would-be crypto criminals that they can't hide. But as big as this win is, it's just one battle in a much larger war. St. Felix and his crew are just one group of people that are part of a much larger problem. In 2023, crypto-related cybercrime in the US hit a staggering $5.6 billion in losses. That's a 45% jump from the previous year. Over 69,000 complaints landed on the FBI's desk through their Internet Crime Complaint Center. That's a lot of people getting burned. But you know who's getting hit the hardest? Our parents and grandparents. Similarly to the folks in this brutal crypto home invasion, most of these complaints came from people over 60. These scammers like to pick on the most vulnerable people in our society. Now let's break this down a bit. A home invasion targeting cryptocurrency isn't all that common. But when we talk about things like cryptocurrency investment scams, we're dealing with a whole different beast. These aren't your typical Nigerian prince emails. These scammers are using sophisticated techniques to trick people into investing in fake crypto projects or manipulated markets. They're exploiting the complexity and novelty of cryptocurrency to confuse victims and make their scams seem legit. Out of that $5.6 billion in losses in 2023, a whopping $3.9 billion came from investment scams alone. That's insane. It's the only category of crypto fraud that went into the billions. We're talking about fake ICOs, or initial coin offerings, pump and dump schemes, and even entire fake exchanges set up just to steal people's money. But wait, it gets even crazier. You know what these thieves are doing now? They're hitting people when they're already down. Imagine this. You've just lost a bunch of money in a crypto scam. You're desperate, feeling stupid, and looking for any way to get your money back. Then, out of nowhere, you get a message from a lawyer saying they can help you recover your stolen crypto. Sounds too good to be true, right? Well, it is. The FBI says that in just 1 year, from February 2023 to February 2024, these fake recovery services stole another $10 million from people who had already been scammed. It's like getting mugged, and then the guy who pretends to help you steals your watch too. These thieves, usually pretending to be lawyers, are using some next-level social engineering tactics. They're reaching out to victims on social media and messaging apps, claiming they have the authority to investigate fraud and recover stolen crypto. Some of them even pretend to be working with the FBI or other government agencies to seem more legit. Most of you are probably aware that real law enforcement won't slide into your DMs like that, offering to get your money back. These scammers are exploiting people's desperation and their lack of understanding. It's a perfect storm of technology and human psychology, and it's only getting worse as crypto becomes more integral in our society. You want to know what else thieves in the cyber world are doing right now? Well, you've probably heard of sextortion scams before, but these creeps are taking it to a whole new level. You may have received one of these recently, but basically, for the unaware, online criminals send out emails claiming they've hacked into your computer and recorded you watching naughty things. But here's where it gets really twisted. They're now including a photo of your actual house in the email. Yeah, you heard that right. They're pulling these images from online mapping services to make their threats seem more real and scary. These scumbags used to just throw in some of your old passwords in the email, which they get from some old data breach, not by actually hacking your computer. But man, seeing your own password in that email, it really does make your heart skip a beat. The technical side of this is pretty interesting though. Think about it. All the cybersecurity analysts, engineers, and researchers that are constantly trying their best to defend data like this from hackers, well, it's for a damn good reason. Pro tip, if you're worried, just put a piece of tape over your webcam when you're not using it. One last thing, just when you think people can't get any lower, hackers are creating Facebook groups that claim to offer live streaming for funerals. Yeah, you heard that right. They're preying on people who are grieving and vulnerable, promising to let them watch a loved one's funeral service online. But the live stream doesn't exist. It's all a setup to get people's credit card info. They're using the photos of the deceased as the group's profile picture, making it look legit. Then they direct you to these sketchy websites that ask for your payment details before you can access the stream. And it doesn't stop at funerals. These scammers are branching out, offering fake streams for all kinds of events, graduations, concerts, weddings, you name it. They're piggybacking on real events that people are posting about on Facebook. What makes this so effective is how it plays on people's emotions. For the uninitiated users of the web, when you're grieving or excited about a big event, you're not thinking clearly. You're more likely to let your guard down and fall for something like this. So yeah, we can celebrate taking down St. Felix and his gang. But let's not kid ourselves. This is just one battle in a much larger war. The next big threat is always going to be there, lurking in the dark corners of the internet, just waiting for someone to click the wrong link or trust the wrong person. If you don't want to be the next target, consider subscribing to the channel. I'll keep you up to date with all the different attack vectors cyber criminals might take, so you can better defend yourself from newer threats like these. Are you ready to proceed watching this sinister hacking video? Warning, we're going to be talking about a major global threat, ransomware. But no, I'm not just talking about any old ransomware today. It's a particularly nasty strain called CUBA ransomware. And this thing is no joke. The level of technical sophistication these hackers are operating at is like something I've never seen before. I'm talking about cutting-edge encryption, custom-built malware tools, you name it. By the end of this, you're going to know exactly why cybersecurity experts are losing sleep over this stuff and why they get paid the big bucks. So let's start at the beginning. CUBA ransomware first popped up on the radar in December 2019. Now, in the cybersecurity world, different organizations sometimes use different names for the same malware or hacker groups. In this case, a company called Mandiant refers to the group behind CUBA ransomware as Tropical Scorpius, or UNC 2596. It's like how in MMA, a fighter might have different nicknames depending on who's talking about them. When CUBA ransomware first emerged, it was actually pretty bare bones compared to what it would become. It didn't even have a data leak site, you know, the dark websites that hackers use to add extra pressure to victims when they're about to publish their stolen data. While the ransomware itself was first detected in December 2019, there's evidence suggesting these guys were active even earlier. Mandiant found an entry on their eventual leak site referencing files received in November 2019. This lines up with the earliest samples of the malware that were uploaded to public repositories, where researchers share malware for analysis. CUBA ransomware focuses primarily on critical infrastructure. We're talking about the systems and networks that keep our society running. By late 2021, the FBI reported that CUBA ransomware had compromised at least 49 entities across 5 critical infrastructure sectors in the US alone. This isn't necessarily about making money. It's about causing widespread disruption and potentially even threatening national security. CUBA ransomware set the stage for hackers around the world. You're about to see how they became a major threat in the cybersecurity landscape. And trust me, this is just the beginning. Alright, let's dive into how these CUBA ransomware guys stepped up their game. They were elite and were always evolving tactics. So initially, these CUBA ransomware operators were using something called hand-setter malware to spread their nasty code. Handsitter is a type of malware that's typically sent as an email attachment. When you execute the attachment, sorry, but you fell for it, and now you're infected. It's a classic move, but it's effective because people still fall for it. But then these guys leveled up. They started exploiting vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange Server, specifically two big ones called Proxy Shell and Proxy Logon. Now this is some serious stuff. Microsoft Exchange Server is used by tons of businesses for email and calendaring. Proxy Shell and Proxy Logon were vulnerabilities that allowed attackers to execute code on the server without needing any credentials. It's like finding an unlocked backdoor into a company's entire email system. By switching to these Exchange vulnerabilities, the CUBA ransomware group could potentially infect entire organizations at once, instead of relying on individual users to open malicious attachments. It's a much more efficient and dangerous method of spreading their malware. Then, these CUBA ransomware operators decided to level up a bit. They weren't content with just encrypting files and demanding ransom. They decided to up the ante by introducing what we call double extortion tactics. They created a data leak site. Now this isn't your average website. They didn't have this site when they first started in 2019, but they likely got the idea from other ransomware groups like Maze and Revel, who were already doing it. This double extortion tactic puts victims in a really tough spot. Even if a company has good backups and could recover from the encryption, now they have to worry about their sensitive data being leaked. It's a 1-2 punch that's incredibly effective. But these guys weren't done yet. They also partnered up with the operators of Handsitter malware for improved access through spam campaigns. This is a classic example of cyber criminals teaming up to become more effective. The Handsitter operators are experts at getting malicious emails past spam filters and into inboxes. By partnering with them, the CUBA ransomware group got better at the initial infection stage of their attacks. So, in 2021, CUBA, or Tropical Scorpius, these guys implemented some seriously advanced encryption techniques. They scrambled data so it can't be read without a special key, which only they had control of. The CUBA ransomware uses two different encryption algorithms, CHACHA for the files themselves and RSA for the encryption key. But they didn't even write this code themselves. They grabbed it from an open source project called WolfSSL. WolfSSL is a small, portable, embedded SSL, or TLS library targeted for use by embedded systems developers. It's open source, so they had no problem getting their hands on it. For gamers out there, they were basically gearing up with best-in-slot items. Now get this, they've got different strategies for encrypting files based on their size. If a file is smaller than 2 megabytes, they encrypt the whole thing. But for bigger files, they break it up into chunks of 1 megabyte and encrypt those separately. This is smart because it saves time on big files, but still makes sure small, important files are fully locked down. Super efficient. After they're done encrypting your files, they slap a .cuba extension. It's like they're signing their work, letting you know exactly who messed up your day. They wanted their victims to know who did it. They leave a ransom note threatening to publish your stolen data if you don't pay up within 3 days. It is seriously impressive, but in the worst way possible. It's like watching a champion boxer use their skills to mug people instead of competing fairly. The CUBA ransomware group has taken some of the best encryption tech out there and turned it into a weapon against businesses and organizations. Crazy stuff, man. I'm about to take you deep into the rabbit hole of how these CUBA ransomware guys operate. It's 2022, and they've seriously upped their game. We're talking about a full-blown malware ecosystem here, and you're about to see it at its finest. Don't go getting any ideas? Let's start with how they get into systems. They're using something called termite. It's what we call an in-memory dropper. Basically, it loads malware directly into a computer's memory without writing to the hard drive. This makes it super hard to detect because traditional antivirus software often looks for suspicious files on the disk. But that's just the beginning. Once they're in, they're using a mix of publicly available tools and their own custom creations. They're fans of Net Support Rat and Cobalt Strike Beacon. These are remote access tools that give them control over infected computers. It's like they're sitting right there at your desk, but who knows where they're actually operating from. Now, let's talk about their custom malware suite. First up is Bug Hatch. Cool name, right? Well, this tool is a downloader that can execute any code the attackers want on your system. It gets its marching orders from a command and control server. Then there's Burnt Cigar. This thing is gross. It's designed to disable your endpoint protection. You know, the software that's supposed to keep you safe from exactly this kind of attack. It does this by exploiting an undocumented feature in an Avast driver. Pretty clever if you ask me. WedgeCut is their reconnaissance tool. It scans networks to find other computers it can infect. It uses something called ICMP packets, which are normally used for network diagnostics, to check if other computers are online and ripe for attack. Finally, there's Cold Draw. This is the main event. The actual ransomware payload that encrypts your files and holds them for ransom. As you may have noticed by now, these guys are using what we call living off the land techniques. They're using normal Windows utilities in ways they weren't intended, making it even harder to spot their malicious activity from legitimate user activity. This whole setup is incredibly sophisticated. They've got tools to break in, disable your defenses, spread through your network, and then hit you with their own custom ransomware. This is just what we know about. Who knows what other tricks they've got up their sleeves that haven't been discovered yet. They likely research new techniques and implement different exploits into their attacks regularly. Alright, now, I'm going to blow your mind with the sheer scale of CUBA ransomware. Tropical Scorpius, or UNC 2596, whatever you like to call them. Just know these dudes have been busy, really busy. They're not just going after one type of target anymore. They're hitting finance, government, healthcare, manufacturing, IT, you name it. They're probably trying to hack it. It's like they're not discriminating at all, just going after anyone they think they can squeeze money out of. Now, get this. About 80% of their victims are in North America. That's a huge concentration. But they're not stopping there. They're expanding into Europe too. It's like they're trying to go global with this operation. The numbers are staggering. By November 2021, these CUBA ransomware actors had demanded at least $74 million in ransom payments. And you know what's even crazier? They actually received 43.9 million of that. That's not chump change, my friend. That's serious money they're extorting from these organizations. As of July 2022, Tropical Scorpius had used their ransomware to hit 27 additional organizations. And I'm talking about all kinds of targets: professional and legal services, state and local government, manufacturing, transportation and logistics, wholesale and retail, real estate, financial services, healthcare, high technology, utilities and energy, construction and education. They hit every sector of the economy. Now, you might be thinking, are these guys completely heartless? Are they going after hospitals and stuff? Well, interestingly enough, they seem to have drawn a line there. Before I continue, don't think these guys are saints. It's actually the unwritten rule in hackers and cybersecurity. No matter who you are or what you do, you never target hospitals. Although this hasn't stopped other hackers, especially some advanced persistent threats. Lockbit, another ransomware group, famously fired one of their ransomware affiliates in the past after they locked up a children's hospital. But anyway, while they're hitting organizations that support non-profits and healthcare entities, they haven't actually been observed directly attacking hospitals, frontline medical services, or urgent care facilities, things of that nature. It's weird that these groups sometimes abide by this sick and twisted code of ethics. But yeah, don't let that fool you into thinking they're not dangerous. Their attacks still cause unfathomable damage to their victims. Their targeted attacks are seriously disruptive. When they hit utilities providers or government agencies that can affect thousands or even millions of people, and the financial impact is in the hundreds of millions. The geographic focus of these attacks is also really telling. The fact that they're mostly hitting North America, but expanding into Europe, shows that they're growing and becoming more ambitious. They're a serious, organized cybercrime group with the capability to cause major damage on an international scale. You never know where you might find an encrypted file with the DOT CUBA extension. Just when you thought this thing couldn't get any more dire, any more serious. Well, now we're talking about a new variant that's just been observed in the wild. It's called SnipBot. This thing is like CUBA ransomware, but jacked up on 500 milligrams of testosterone. So, SnipBot is part of this family of malware called ROMCOM. Unit 42, an elite cybersecurity research team, are calling it ROMCOM 5.0. ROMCOM is another malware family, by the way, that's been seen deployed in the same environments with CUBA. So, version 5.0. Well, that should give you an idea of how advanced this thing is. First off, this SnipBot has 27 different commands it can use. That's a lot of flexibility for the attackers. They can do all sorts of nasty stuff like steal specific data or control different parts of an infected system. SnipBot also has these new anti-sandboxing techniques. Now, sandboxing is something security researchers use to safely study malware. But SnipBot is trying to outsmart them. It does this in a couple of ways. First, it does hash checks on its own code and any processes it creates. A hash is like a digital fingerprint. If anything looks off, SnipBot might realize it's being analyzed and shut down or change its behavior. Then it checks the Windows registry for specific entries. It's looking for at least 100 entries in something called recent docs and 50 subkeys in shell bags. These are places where Windows stores information about your recent activity. If SnipBot doesn't see enough of these entries, it might think it's in a fake environment and not a real computer. Furthermore, SnipBot uses something called window message-based control flow obfuscation. That's a mouthful, I know. Basically, it breaks its code into chunks and only runs each chunk when it receives a specific Windows message. This makes it super hard for researchers to figure out what the malware is doing just by looking at the code. And get this, the main part of SnipBot, a file called single.dll, is stored in an encrypted form right in the Windows registry. The registry is a database where Windows stores all kinds of settings. Normally, you don't store programs there. But by hiding in the registry, SnipBot makes itself harder to detect and remove. It's scary stuff, man. And that's why cybersecurity is such a big deal these days. It's an arms race, and the stakes are incredibly high when you've got to protect yourself from something like this. When you look at how CUBA ransomware has evolved from 2019 to 2024, it's mind-blowing. They started with pretty basic tactics, but now they've got this whole suite of advanced tools. They have new malware, and they're not just encrypting files anymore. They're disabling security software, spreading through networks, and hiding their tracks like ninjas. Law enforcement has no idea who they are or where they are hiding. Can you believe that? Imagine a bank robber. They usually don't make it very far before getting caught, but these guys have been performing the biggest heists every damn day for 5 years now, and they're laughing straight to the bank. This is a constant state of cyber warfare, and Tropical Scorpius, or UNC 2596, are one of the most sophisticated players on the battlefield. I want to end this video on a bit of a cliffhanger. To be fair, most of them are, but this is something that you'll probably go to sleep thinking about. Turns out this rabbit hole goes even deeper. There's this thing called the industrial spy marketplace. Now you might be thinking, what's that got to do with ransomware? Well, in May 2022, it was observed that industrial spy was getting into the ransomware game. This marketplace started out as a place where cybercriminals could buy and sell stolen data. But then they decided to branch out into ransomware. That's not so uncommon, I guess, since the operators of these websites are deep in the cybercriminal hacking game. However, there seems to be a connection between Industrial Spy and Tropical Scorpius, the group behind CUBA ransomware. Now, I'm not saying they're definitely the same group, but it's like when you see two fighters using the same techniques, you start to wonder if they had the same trainer. You know what I mean? Secondly, there's another malware operation called Chanitor that seems to have some connections to CUBA ransomware. Again, found in the wild were some overlaps between Chanitor and Cold Draw, which, if you remember, is the final payload that they use to encrypt and steal files. What kind of overlaps? Well, they're using some of the same infrastructure. That's like the backbone of their operations. They're also using common code signing certificates. These are like digital signatures that are supposed to prove software is legit. The fact that they're sharing these is a big red flag. How could they honestly both be using the exact same certificates? It's likely not just a coincidence. They're also using something called a shared packer. A packer is a tool that compresses and encrypts malware to make it harder to detect. Using the same packer is another sign these operations might be connected. The icing on the cake is that they're even using similar names for their domains, files, and URL paths. It's like they're not even trying to hide the connection. Now, why does all this matter? Well, it shows just how deep these cybercriminal rabbit holes go, and how interconnected operators in the cyber underworld have become. We're not talking about lone wolf hackers anymore. These are organized groups that are either on the same team or working together to exfiltrate as much data and money as they possibly can. Greed is a powerful thing. The potential connections to other operations like Industrial Spy and Chanitor, that's scary stuff. For the average person, this means the threat of ransomware is more serious than ever. And for cybersecurity professionals, man, their job just keeps getting tougher. They're not just fighting individual threats anymore. Network defenders come up with new protection methods, blacklist these cyber criminals' IPs and tools, but they always find ways around them. You better start understanding these threats and being constantly vigilant. Because trust me, these cyber criminals, they're not slowing down anytime soon. The Snipbot variant is just their latest creation, and soon they will have another tool, potentially harvesting the power of artificial intelligence, like generative AI, to create malware on a level we've never ever seen before. In December 2023, this hacker who goes by Corley's starts selling something that went by the name of Cryptina on the dark web. Cryptina, as you might have guessed, was malware, but not any kind of malware. It's what we call ransomware as a service. Basically, it's everything a hacker might need, the entire infrastructure behind the ransomware, that allows other criminals to focus purely on hacking and locking systems, rather than maintaining the entire illegal operation. At first, Corliss was selling this Cryptina package for $500. Then they jacked up the price to $800. That's some serious cash for what's essentially a crime starter kit. But here's where things get a little strange. You would have thought their business was booming, right? Well, just a couple months later in February 2024, Corley suddenly stops selling Cryptina. Instead, they do something that isn't so common in the cybercrime world. They post the entire source code on a hacking forum called Breach Forums for all to use. They just asked for support. He asked other criminals to consider donating if the ransomware could help them. Now, for those who aren't familiar with coding, the source code is like the DNA of a program. It's the raw instructions that make the software work. By releasing this, Corley's essentially gave away the blueprint for Cryptina to anyone who wanted it. In turn, this opens up a wide range of possibilities for hackers and grave dangers for all people and businesses globally. This is a big deal in the world of malware evolution. When source code gets leaked like this, it often leads to an explosion of new variants. Other hackers can take that code, modify it, and create their own customized versions of the malware. And well, that's exactly what happened. Now, let's rewind a bit to mid-2022. This is where we see the rise of another major player. They went by the name of Target Company, or MEOWS. MEOWS starts out as a traditional ransomware operation, but then they make a game-changing move to the notorious ransomware as a service model. With this model, the creators of the ransomware don't carry out attacks themselves. Instead, they recruit other criminals to do the dirty work and then split the profits with the original creators as a reward for using their infrastructure to carry out the attack. What's really interesting is how MEOWS recruits these affiliates. They create online personas and start hanging out on underground hacking forums. But they don't call their recruits hackers or criminals. No, they use the term pen testers, which is short for penetration testers. This is a clever bit of criminal marketing. In the legitimate tech world, penetration testers are ethical hackers who help companies find security flaws. By using this term, MEOWS is trying to make their criminal enterprise sound more professional and less, well, criminal. Alright, let's dive into the next chapter of this epic cyber tale. We're talking October 2022, and MEOWS is stepping up their game in a big way. So MEOWS starts using something called Tor for their dirty work. Now Tor, or the onion router, is this network that lets you browse the internet anonymously. It's like a digital maze that bounces your connection all over the world, making it nearly impossible to trace. But here's where it gets really interesting. MEOWS isn't just using Tor to hide, they're using it to run their whole extortion operation. They set up these special Tor pages where they force their victims to negotiate. Each victim gets their own personal ID, kind of like a twisted customer service system. It's a way for MEOWS to keep everything organized while staying hidden. Now, let's talk about the people behind MEOWS. The investigators managed to identify 5 different users involved in this operation: Maestro, THIEVES, Admin, Vampire, and Panda. These aren't their real names, of course. They're online handles, but it gives us a sense of the team running this show. Here's where I explain some technical info, so bear with me. All the attacks coming from MEOWS are using IP addresses that belong to the same autonomous system number. This is basically a big chunk of the internet controlled by one organization. In this case, this IP block was owned by a hosting provider called X-Host Internet Solution. This is what we call bulletproof hosting in the cybersecurity world. It's not your average web hosting service. These are providers that turn a blind eye to criminal activity, or even actively help hide it. They make it incredibly difficult to shut down malicious operations. It's law enforcement's worst nightmare. MEOWS is making it much harder for law enforcement or cybersecurity teams to track them down or disrupt their operations. It's like they've set up their criminal headquarters in a well-guarded and secure location. The combination of Tor for communication and bulletproof hosting for their infrastructure shows just how sophisticated and well organized this malware operation has become. They're not just some random hackers. This is a professional criminal enterprise with serious technical know-how, with connections around the globe to help them succeed. Remember that leaked source code we were talking about earlier? Well, I didn't tell you for no reason. Corley's posted this code on breach forums. It's a forum on the dark web where cybercriminals gather to buy, sell, and trade all sorts of illegal goods and services. Posting the Cryptina source code here is like throwing chum in shark-infested waters. The target company, or malware group that's been destroying networks, was about to add another tool to their arsenal. So here's what goes down. One of the malware affiliates, they mess up big time. They accidentally leave an open directory on their staging server. Now, for those who don't know, a staging server is like a test kitchen for hackers. It's where they prep all their nasty tools before unleashing them on the world. This open directory is a goldmine for cybersecurity researchers. It's got all sorts of goodies, staged payloads, malware builder tools, even the source code itself. It's like the affiliate left the blueprints to their entire operation just sitting out in the open. They made a pretty big mistake. When the researchers start digging into this stuff, they realize something huge. This malware ransomware, it's actually based on Cryptina. They're not reinventing the wheel. They're taking something that already works and tweaking it for their own purposes. The affiliate made some changes to the Cryptina source files and scripts, but we're not talking major overhauls here. Mostly, they just removed references to Cryptina and changed the comments and naming conventions to malware. I hope they donated to the poor guy who made it, because to be honest, they didn't change much at all. Think of it like stealing your friend's assignment, but just changing the name on the top of the page. They've stripped out most of the Cryptina branding from the source and support files, and now they're calling it malware Linux 1.0. But they missed a spot. There's still a Cryptina database in there. It's like they were painting over a wall and missed a corner. This whole situation shows us how the cybercrime world operates. These guys aren't always coming up with brand new, sophisticated attacks. Sometimes they're just taking what's already out there, making a few tweaks, and passing it off as something new. And the fact that it's targeting Linux? That's a big deal. Some of the most important servers are running Linux, so this could potentially cause some serious damage worldwide. So by now, you're probably eager to know just how this malware works, am I right? Well, listen carefully. I'm about to expose the inner workings of their ransomware. First off, malware is written in C++. That's a programming language that's known for its speed and efficiency. It uses something called AES 256 BC for file encryption. Now, AES 256 is no joke. It's a super strong encryption standard that's used by governments and big corporations to protect their most sensitive data. The CBC part, that stands for cipher blockchaining. It's a way of linking the encryption of one block of data to the next, making it even harder to crack. Here's how it works. malware uses AES 256 in CBC mode to encrypt individual files. The keys and configuration data are scrambled using a method called XOR, then encoded with base 64. This makes it incredibly difficult for anyone to figure out how to decrypt the files without the right key. But here's where it gets really interesting. The ransomware has a function here, shown on screen. This is the heart of the encryption process. It's using a standard implementation of AES 256 CBC from a library called OpenSSL. This is smart from the attacker's perspective because it's using tried and true encryption methods rather than risking bugs in custom code. Now, one thing that's unusual about malware is that it doesn't have any anti-analysis or environment detection features. This is actually kind of weird for sophisticated malware. Usually, these things try to hide from security researchers. But malware, it's just out there in the open. It doesn't care if you try to analyze it. Here's another crazy detail. One of the first things malware does is check the default language of the system it's infecting. If it detects a Russian-speaking environment, it stops. This is likely to avoid targeting Russian users and potentially drawing heat from Russian authorities. As long as their targets reside outside of Russia, then it's game on. Once it's in, malware starts flexing its muscles. It adjusts its own privileges, giving itself more power over the system. It's trying to become admin of the computer it's infecting. Then, the real destruction begins. Malware starts a separate thread that disables recovery options and ignores boot failures. This makes it much harder for victims to recover their systems. It also stops certain services on the machine, likely the crucial ones for security. For their Windows variant, it contains a sinister aspect to the malware. Malware deletes shadow copies. These are like backup snapshots of your files. By deleting these, malware makes it much harder for you to recover your files without paying the ransom. It uses a command that looks like this. This is a legitimate Windows command that's being abused for malicious purposes. Malware also deletes links to important system tools, shown on screen. This is another way of making it harder for victims or security professionals to fight back. Finally, after encrypting all your files, malware phones home. It sends a unique fingerprint of your computer to a command and control server. This is how the attackers keep track of their victims. This is some seriously advanced stuff. Malware isn't just encrypting files, it's systematically dismantling the victim's ability to recover or fight back. This is scary stuff. You wouldn't want this anywhere near your computer or your environment. Otherwise, it's GG. Alright, let's dive into how these malware guys actually get into systems and who they're going after. If you're worried you might be a target, then listen here. First off, malware is primarily going after Microsoft SQL servers. These are database servers that a lot of businesses use to store important information. Now you might think, well, shouldn't these be pretty secure? And yeah, they should be. But here's the thing, a lot of times they're not. Malware is using a few different tricks to get into these servers. One of their main moves is what we call brute force attacks. Basically, they're just trying every possible password they can think of until they get in. It's like trying to guess the combination on a lock, but at computer speed. They're also using dictionary attacks, which is similar, but instead of trying every possible combination, they're using a list of common passwords. These attacks are exploiting a fundamental weakness in how many systems handle authentication. Instead of limiting login attempts or using more secure methods like multi-factor authentication, many Microsoft SQL servers are left vulnerable to these repeated guessing attacks. But it's not just about guessing passwords. Malware is also exploiting unpatched vulnerabilities. This means they're taking advantage of known security flaws that haven't been fixed yet. It's like finding a hole in a fence that the owner knows about but hasn't repaired. Here's where it gets really devious. In some of their attacks, malware is using something called pure crypto as their initial payload. A payload is the part of the malware that actually does the damage. Pure crypto is a type of malware loader, which means its job is to sneak the main malware past security systems and then launch it. Anyway, what you need to know is that malware isn't going after small fry. They're using what's called a big game hunting strategy. They're specifically looking for companies that make over $10 million a year, mainly in the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and Germany. But here's an interesting twist. They're actively avoiding government and educational targets. This is probably to avoid drawing too much heat from law enforcement. What's really concerning is that they're not just hitting Microsoft SQL servers. They're also exploiting vulnerabilities in Fortinet and Cisco systems, which are used for network security, and they're going after VPN access points. All of this paints a picture of a really well-organized, strategic criminal operation. They're not just throwing attacks out there randomly. They're carefully choosing their targets and using a variety of advanced techniques to get in. It's like watching a movie about bank robbers, except it's happening in real life, completely over the internet, and it's happening to real businesses with real consequences. malware is in full swing, targeting big companies and causing some serious damage. But here's where it gets interesting. The cybersecurity world starts fighting back. Now let's talk about how these security experts are trying to catch target company, or malware. First up, they're looking at something called Microsoft SQL logs. These logs are like a record of everything that happens on a database server. Normally Windows doesn't collect these automatically, but security teams are realizing they're gold mines of information. Here's what they're doing with these logs. They're watching for connections to the Microsoft SQL server, especially from public IP addresses. If they see an IP address that keeps trying to connect and failing, that's a red flag. They're also keeping an eye on changes to certain parameters. There are these things called XP_CMD shell, CLR, and OL automation. If these get turned on suddenly, it could mean someone's trying to do something they shouldn't. They're also watching for something called drop commands and payload executions. Basically, they're looking for signs that someone's trying to mess with the database or run malicious code. But here's where it gets really technical. The security folks are also watching something called the process tree. This is like a family tree of all the processes running on a computer. If they see something weird in this tree, it could mean malware is at work. Now malware isn't just using Microsoft SQL servers. They're also abusing something called Windows Management Instrumentation. They're using a tool called WMIC to run their malicious code. It's like they're using Windows' own tools against it. Another nasty trick malware uses is messing with system recovery. They use a command called bcedit to make it harder for victims to recover their systems. But the good news is, security teams have figured out how to spot this too. All of this detective work falls under what we call log monitoring and process monitoring. It's like setting up a bunch of security cameras all over your computer system. All this monitoring is only part of the solution. The experts are saying that strong passwords and keeping your systems updated are super important too. You can't have a high-tech alarm system without remembering to lock your doors. You might be thinking, can this story get any worse? Well, actually, I have some good news, but don't get too excited because it's a bit of a mixed bag. So, in February 2022, this Czech cybersecurity company called Avast comes out with a free tool to help victims of the malware ransomware gang recover their files. Now that sounds great, right? But here's the thing. It's not as simple as just hitting a button and getting all your stuff back. First off, this decryption tool only works under certain circumstances. It's not just about unlocking your files. You actually need to have an original, unencrypted version of at least one of the files that got locked up. The tool then compares the encrypted file with the original to figure out how to crack the encryption. This process of ransomware decryption is seriously complex. What's happening behind the scenes is that the tool is trying to reverse engineer the encryption key that the ransomware used. It's like trying to figure out what the lock looks like by comparing a locked box to an unlocked one. But this process is slow, like really slow. Avast says it can take up to tens of hours. Why? Because it's using all the processing power of your computer to try and crack this encryption key. It's basically turning your computer into a code-breaking machine, running through countless possibilities until it finds the right key. Basically, you wouldn't want to run it on an important server. This password cracking process is intense, but while it's great that there's a free tool out there to help victims, it's not exactly a quick fix. It's more like a last resort for when you've got no other options and a lot of time on your hands. This whole situation really shows how complex and resilient modern ransomware is. Even with advanced cybersecurity tools and a lot of computing power, it can still take days to undo the damage these attacks cause. And these guys got lucky. Usually, you'll either have to pay up or forget about the files altogether. It's a reminder of why prevention is so crucial in the world of cybersecurity. What did you think of this story? What do you think the future holds for the MEOWS ransomware gang? If history repeats itself, then these guys are going to cause havoc for a long time to come. Hopefully one day soon I can tell you about the law enforcement takedown, but the time for that has not come yet. So if you want to stay in the loop, consider subscribing to the channel. Take care and be safe out there.